The most powerful conversation you will ever have is not with your parents, your teachers, your friends, or even your critics. It is the one you have with yourself. Every single day, without pause, your mind is speaking. It whispers doubts, it builds hopes, it fuels determination, and sometimes it sabotages dreams before they even begin. Most people underestimate this inner dialogue, treating its background noise. But in truth, it is the architect of their destiny. Change the conversation you are having within yourself, and you will witness a dramatic shift in how you engage with the world outside. Think of it like this. Your mind is a filter. Every word you speak to yourself colors the lens through which you perceive reality. If your inner voice is constantly saying, "I can't do this, I'm not good enough, life is unfair," then you will experience life through that same filter. You will notice failures more than successes, obstacles more than opportunities, and rejections more than possibilities. On the other hand, if your inner dialogue is disciplined, constructive, and empowering, you will begin to notice strengths where others see weaknesses, chances where others see risks, and lessons where others see set. This is not about pretending that everything is perfect. Self-deception is no solution. Rather, it is about aligning your thoughts with truth and potential. For instance, instead of telling yourself, "I always fail," you could say, "I have failed before, but I have also succeeded, and I am capable of learning." That small shift changes despair into resilience. One thought weakens you, the other strengthens you. Psychologists call this the principle of cognitive framing, the idea that the way you frame an experience determines the meaning you assign to it. Two people can face the exact same event. One sees it as a devastating end, while the other sees it as a necessary challenge for growth. The event itself is neutral. It is the inner dialogue that gives it power. This is why great leaders, inventors, and reformers throughout history have often had unshakable inner conversations. They trained their minds to tell themselves this can be done, even when the evidence was scarce. Now, why does this inner dialogue matter so much? Because thoughts don't just stay in your head, they spill into action. When you repeatedly tell yourself you are not capable, you hesitate, you withdraw, and you avoid risks. Your external life begins to mirror that hesitancy. But when your mind tells you, "I can take the first step," you actually move even if cautiously, and that movement creates momentum. In essence, your inner dialogue plants the seeds of your external behavior. Let's take a practical example. Imagine a student whose every test they fail reinforces the inner voice that says, "I am just not good at math." Over time, this thought solidifies into identity. The student stops trying, avoids opportunities, and confirms the very belief they started with. But if the inner dialogue changes to, "Math is difficult for me now, but I can improve with practice," the story changes. The same struggle becomes a challenge, not a death sentence, and eventually effort bears fruit. Your life is a reflection of these thousands of inner sentences repeated daily, often unconsciously. The tragedy is that many people allow their minds to become hostile territory. They bully themselves with words they would never use against others. They replay mistakes, highlight flaws, and downplay strengths. In doing so, they construct invisible prisons that prevent growth. But here lies the hope. Just as you created those prisons with words, you can dismantle them with new ones. Now, this is where discipline enters the picture. Changing your inner dialogue is not about a one-time burst of positivity. It is about training your mind the way you would train your body. You don't get stronger by lifting weights once. You get stronger by repeating the exercise consistently. Similarly, you change your thoughts by catching the negative ones, replacing them with constructive ones, and repeating that practice until your mind naturally speaks in alignment with your potential. There is a famous principle in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, which proves that your brain literally rewires itself based on repeated thought patterns. That means every time you choose to correct the destructive inner dialogue, you are not just thinking differently, you are reshaping the very structure of your brain. Over time, optimism, resilience, and self-belief become second nature, not forced habits. Of course, this is not easy. The mind resists change because old dialogues are comfortable, even if they are destructive. It feels safer to say I can't than to risk saying I can and possibly fail. But ask yourself this, which is truly safer, remaining in the same place, trapped by your own words, or stepping into the possibility of growth, even if it means stumbling? When you start mastering your inner dialogue, you realize something profound. You are not merely a passive observer of life. You are an active creator of it. You are not at the mercy of circumstance. You are at the mercy of your own repeated thoughts. Change those thoughts, and circumstances begin to respond. So remember this, the words you whisper to yourself in silence are building the house you live in tomorrow. Make them strong, make them honest, make them hopeful. Because once your inner dialogue changes, your actions change. And when your actions change, your life cannot remain the same. One of the greatest barriers to human potential is not lack of talent, lack of opportunity, or even lack of resources. It is the belief that change is impossible. People often live inside invisible barriers, defined not by the world outside, but by the limits they place on their own minds. They say, this is just how I am, or things will never get better, and in doing so, they surrender to a life smaller than what they are capable of living. But here's the truth, the boundaries that hold you back are not carved into stone. They are written in thought, and thought can be rewritten. The mind has an extraordinary ability to shift from a posture of limitation to one of possibility, and when it does, life begins to expand. Think for a moment about the difference between these two mindsets. The language of limitation says, I don't have enough money, so I can't start that business. The language of possibility says, I may not have money, but I can start with an idea, a plan, and persistence. The limitation mindset says, I failed once, therefore I am a failure. The possibility mindset replies, failure is information, and I can use it to improve next time. The difference is subtle in words, but massive in results. People who live in limitation interpret every challenge as a wall. People who live in possibility interpret every challenge as a door. The wall says, stop here. The door says, open me and see what's on the other side. This shift is not about blind optimism. It is not about ignoring real problems or pretending everything is easy. It is about refusing to let difficulty define destiny. The truth is, most great accomplishments in history were born out of limitation. The Wright brothers did not have government funding, formal degrees, or advanced technology. They had determination, imagination, and the refusal to believe that flight was impossible. Where others saw limits, they saw possibility, and because of that shift, the world was forever changed. Here is why this principle matters for you. Every time you interpret your situation as a dead end, your energy collapses. You stop trying, you convince yourself it's not worth it. That is the tragedy of limitation. It paralyzes before the real fight even begins. But the moment you say, maybe there is another way, maybe I can figure it out, maybe it's possible, your energy changes. Possibility creates movement, and movement, even if small, leads to progress. Let's bring this closer to everyday life. Imagine someone who wants to improve their health. The limitation mindset says, I don't have time to go to the gym, so it's hopeless. Thought kills effort before it starts. But the possibility mindset says, I may not have hours for the gym, but I can start with a shrew-minute walk. I can choose water over soda. I can take one step today. That single step breaks inertia, and as small steps multiply, the person discovers momentum and eventually transformation. The same principle applies to relationships, careers, studies, or personal growth. The language of limitation always exaggerates obstacles and minimizes potential. The language of possibility acknowledges obstacles but maximizes creativity and determination. It doesn't ask, why me? But instead, why not me, Now, let's address a common objection. But what if I try and still fail? This is the voice of limitation disguised as caution. The deeper question to ask is, what happens if I never try? Failure is painful, yes, but at least it teaches inaction, teaches nothing except regret. Those who live in possibility understand that failure is not the end. It is part of the process. They see every setback as a stepping stone rather than a graveyard. Psychologically, this shift is crucial because the human brain is a meaning-making machine. If you train it to see limitation, it will find endless evidence to confirm that story. But if you train it to see possibility, it will begin scanning the world for opportunities, connections, and creative solutions that were invisible before. It is not that they didn't exist. It is that your mind was not tuned to see them. Think of it like tuning a radio. If you are locked on the frequency of limitation, all you will hear is static about why things can't be done. But the moment you shift to the frequency of possibility, a new channel opens, and suddenly you are hearing clarity, direction, and opportunity. The station was always there, you simply weren't tuned in. This is why so many people who achieve remarkable things often start with nothing. They were not given privilege, wealth, or security. They were given the same raw materials as everyone else: time, effort, and thought. What set them apart was not the absence of hardship, but the refusal to define themselves by it. They shifted from I can't to I can try, and that shift made all the difference. So the question becomes, how do you personally move from limitation to possibility? The first step is awareness. You must listen carefully to the language of your thoughts, catch yourself when you say I can't, and challenge it. Ask, is that absolutely true, or am I just choosing to believe it? More often than not, you'll realize it's not a fact, it's a perspective. The second step is replacement. Once you catch a limiting thought, replace it with a possibility-focused one. Instead of I don't know how, say I don't know how yet, but I can learn. Instead of this is too big, say this is big, but I can break it into smaller steps. Each replacement reprograms the brain toward possibility. The third step is practice. This is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle. Just as muscles grow through repeated lifting, your capacity to think in possibility grows through repeated practice. Over time, your default response to challenges becomes curiosity instead of despair, creativity instead of paralysis, courage instead of retreat. In the end, shifting from limitation to possibility is about reclaiming agency. It is about refusing to let your circumstances, your past, or your fears dictate your future. When you choose possibility, you choose to expand the horizon of your life. And as that horizon expands, so too does your potential. Remember this, limitation shrinks the world until it feels like a prison. Possibility expands the world until it feels like an open field. Which one you live in depends not on chance, but on choice. The choice to shift your thoughts, and in doing so, to shift your life. If you want to understand who you are becoming, don't just look at your goals or your dreams, look at your habits. Because while goals give you direction, habits determine whether you will arrive. And behind every habit is a thought that once whispered, this is who I am, and this is what I do. A thought repeated enough becomes a belief. A belief practiced enough becomes a habit. And habits, stacked one on top of the other, form the architecture of your character. That character, in turn, shapes the destiny you walk into. This is why so many wise voices throughout history have warned us. Be careful of your thoughts, for they become your words. Be careful of your words, for they become your actions. Be careful of your actions, for they become your habits. And be careful of your habits, for they become your destiny. Most people underestimate this chain. They imagine destiny is written by fate or chance. But in reality, destiny is being shaped every morning when you wake up, every choice you repeat, every thought you allow to linger. You are building the road you will walk tomorrow, because ultimately your life will not be shaped by one big decision, but by thousands of small ones. And those decisions are guided by habits. The habits are born from thoughts. And those thoughts, you get to choose them. Remember this, destiny is not written in the stars. It is written in your routines. Guard your thoughts because they create habits. Guard your habits because they create your life. There is a law at work in human life that is so subtle, most people ignore it. Yet so powerful, it quietly determines the shape of their reality. You attract what you focus on. This is not magic, nor is it superstition. It is psychology, neuroscience, and lived experience converging into one undeniable truth. The human mind is like a spotlight in a dark room. Wherever you shine that light, details appear. Focus on fear, and you will notice threats everywhere. Focus on gratitude, and you will notice blessings you had been blind to. The reality around you may not change immediately, but the way you interpret it, the way you respond to it, and the opportunities you see within it will change completely. Consider this, your brain is bombarded with millions of bits of information every second. You cannot possibly process all of it. So what happens? Your brain uses a filtering system called the reticular activating system, or RAS, to decide what gets through. And what trains this filter? Your focus. If you keep thinking about how life is unfair, your brain highlights every example that confirms it. But if you focus on growth, solutions, or opportunity, your brain begins searching for evidence to support those things. Instead, this explains why two people can live in the same environment, face the same hardships, and yet tell two completely different stories about life. One says, nothing ever works out for me. The other says, challenges make me stronger. Both are correct, not because life is different for them, but because focus has trained their minds to filter reality differently. Think about when you buy a new car, maybe a red one. Suddenly, it feels like the whole world is driving red cars. Did thousands of people go out and buy the same car as you overnight? No, the cars were always there. Your focus simply tuned your mind to notice them. Life works the same way. Opportunities, lessons, and growth have always been around you. The question is not whether they exist. The question is whether you are focused enough to see them. Now let's be clear. Focusing on positivity does not mean denying pain or pretending hardship does not exist. If you burn your hand, you don't focus away the pain. What you can do, however, is decide whether to fixate on the injury or focus on the healing. Focus doesn't eliminate reality. It shapes your response to it. Here is a simple but profound example. Imagine two students who both fail an exam. One focuses on the humiliation. Everyone is smarter than me. I'll never succeed. That focus breeds shame, which paralyzes effort. The other focuses on the lesson. I didn't prepare properly. Next time I'll study differently. That focus breeds resilience, which fuels action. This same event is also why gratitude is such a powerful practice. When you discipline your mind to focus on what is good, even in difficulty, you create a mental environment that attracts more strength, more clarity, and more opportunity. Gratitude doesn't magically bring new blessings. It opens your eyes to blessings that were invisible before. And that awareness transforms how you live. But focus has a darker side too. If you consistently dwell on what is broken, unfair, or impossible, you begin to attract the very conditions you fear. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because your focus blinds you to alternatives. You interpret rejection as proof of failure rather than redirection. You see challenges as evidence you should quit rather than opportunities to improve. Slowly, you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why worry can be so destructive. Worry is focus, rehearsing disaster. It convinces your mind that the worst outcome is inevitable, and your behavior begins aligning with that belief. You play small, you retreat, and you sabotage yourself before the world even has the chance to. So how do you reverse this? By taking ownership of your focus. You cannot always control your circumstances, but you can control what your mind dwells on. That is your power. Begin by asking yourself daily, where is my attention going? Am I focusing on the problem or the solution? Am I focusing on what drains me or on what strengthens me? Shift your focus deliberately. If your mind says this is impossible, challenge it with, what's one thing I can try? If your mind says everything is going wrong, redirect it to, what is one thing going right? That small shift is like moving the spotlight to a new corner of the room. Suddenly, details you hadn't seen before come into view. Great achievers understand this intuitively. Athletes focus on the win, not the fear of loss. Entrepreneurs focus on opportunity, not the risk of failure. Leaders focus on solutions, not the endless list of problems. They are not blind to reality. They simply refuse to waste focus on what does not move them forward. Science confirms this as well. Studies show that optimistic people, those who focus on possibility, live longer, recover from illness faster, and perform better under pressure. Why? Because their focus trains their bodies and minds to respond with resilience instead of defeat. Their immune systems strengthen. Their creativity expands. Their stress decreases. In other words, their focus doesn't just change how they see life, it changes how they live it. Here's the challenge. Look at your current life. Is it possible that what you are experiencing is not just a reflection of circumstance, but also a reflection of focus? Have you been noticing only the closed doors while ignoring the ones slightly open? Have you been obsessing over problems while overlooking opportunities sitting right in front of you? If so, the good news is this: you can change it today. You can retrain your focus the same way you train a muscle. Start small, practice gratitude daily. Set intentions in the morning. Today, I will look for opportunities. Catch yourself when negativity dominates your focus, and redirect. With time, your RAS, your brain's filter, will recalibrate. And soon you'll find yourself naturally seeing possibility where you once only saw limitation. Remember this: life is always offering you evidence. If you focus on despair, you'll find it. If you focus on hope, you'll find it. If you focus on growth, you'll find it. The world reflects the lens you choose to look through. So choose carefully, because what you focus on today is of every transformation the life you will live tomorrow. Undeniable truth. Life does not change by accident. It changes by choice. Too often, people wait for external conditions to shift before they take action. They wait for the economy to improve, for someone to give them permission, for the perfect opportunity to arrive, or for motivation to magically appear. But waiting is itself a choice, the choice to remain the same. You must understand this. The power to change is not hidden in some distant future. It is embedded in the choices you make today. Every moment presents you with two paths: the path of continuation, where you repeat the same patterns, or the path of transformation, where you decide to do something different. And while the first path feels safe, it leads only to more of the same. The second path, though uncertain, is the only one that opens the possibility of growth. Choice is powerful because it gives you ownership the moment you recognize that you are not merely a product of circumstance, but an active participant in shaping your future. Relationship with life changes. You stop saying, "I can't," and start asking, "What can I do?" You stop waiting for the perfect conditions and start creating them. You stop being a passenger and take hold of the wheel. Now, choice does not mean you control everything. Life will always contain factors beyond your reach: accidents, disappointments, unfairness, and unpredictability. But even in those moments, you retain the freedom to choose your response. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, expressed this profoundly: everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Even in the most unimaginable suffering, he discovered that choice was the foundation of human dignity and transformation. In your own life, the stakes may not be as extreme, but the principle remains the same. Every day you choose what thoughts to entertain, what habits to practice, what relationships to nurture, and what risks to take. These choices may seem small, even insignificant in isolation, but over time, they accumulate into a future. You cannot escape the consequences of your choices, but you can direct them. Think of your life like a river. Every choice is a small current pushing you in one direction or another. A single choice may not change the river's course immediately, but repeated choices over time can completely alter its path. If you consistently choose passivity, fear, and comfort, the river will bend towards stagnation. If you consistently choose courage, discipline, and growth, the river will bend toward possibility. The river cannot flow in both directions at once. Your destiny follows the direction of your choices. The difficulty, of course, is that choice often feels uncomfortable. Change is demanding. Choosing transformation usually means stepping out of what is familiar and entering the unknown. It may require breaking free from toxic habits, distancing yourself from unhelpful relationships, or confronting painful truths about yourself. It is tempting to delay such choices in the hope that tomorrow will be easier. But tomorrow rarely brings ease. It only brings more of the same patterns unless you decide differently today. This is why responsibility and choice are inseparable. Responsibility means owning the fact that your life, for better or worse, is largely the product of your own decisions. That can feel heavy because it eliminates excuses, but it is also liberating because it means you are not powerless. The life you want is not locked away in someone else's hands. It is within your reach, waiting for you to choose it. Let's take a practical example. Imagine someone stuck in a job they dislike. They complain daily, blaming the company, the boss, or the system, and perhaps all of those complaints are valid. But as long as they continue to choose inaction, they remain trapped. The transformation begins not when the boss changes, not when the system changes, but when they choose, I will develop new skills, I will apply elsewhere, I will build something better. That choice may not bring instant results, but it initiates movement, and movement is the seed of transformation. Consider health. Many people know what they should do: eat better, move more, rest properly. The gap is not knowledge, it is choice. Each day presents the decision, comfort or discipline, excuses or progress. The transformation begins not with a perfect plan, but with a choice to act differently today, even if the step is small. The same applies to mindset. You may not control every thought that enters your mind, but you can choose which thoughts you give power to. When a negative thought appears, you have a choice: feed it until it becomes a belief, or challenge it until it withers. When discouragement whispers you're not capable, you have a choice: surrender to it or respond, I will try anyway. Those micro choices determine whether your future shrinks or expands. So here is the reality: transformation is not one grand decision, it is 1,000 small ones made consistently. It is not about suddenly becoming a different person overnight. It is about becoming a slightly better version of yourself each day through deliberate choices. And as those choices stack, they form momentum, and momentum carries you further than willpower alone ever could. But none of this begins until you decide. The moment of choice is the ignition point. Without it, nothing changes. With it, everything begins to change. That is why the most transformative words you can ever say to yourself are, I choose. So let me ask you, what are you choosing today? To remain as you are, or to take the first step toward who you could become? To repeat the cycle of yesterday, or to break it? To let fear dictate your path, or to let courage carve a new one? Remember this, transformation is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of choice. And when you take responsibility for those choices, when you decide to align your thoughts, habits, and focus with growth, life itself begins to shift in response, because in the end, your life will not be defined by what happened to you, but by the choices you made in response. And the greatest choice you can make, the choice that changes everything, is to believe that transformation is possible, and then to choose it day after day until it becomes your reality.